Alright, so let's talk about employment law. This is an area that people are always asking me about. Mike, can I get fired like this? Can I be hired for this? Well, it depends on the state you're in. I know that Georgia is an at-will state, so you can be hired and fired for anything. Alright? But when we talk about labor law, we're talking about unfair labor practices. You don't want to discriminate. Promotes good faith collective bargaining between employers and employees. And collective bargaining, that has to do with the unions and whatnot. Addresses relationships between employers and unions. And again, all these things are important. Employees are what make the world go round. Certainly, some of you may want to be business owners one day. I encourage you to do so. And you're going to have employees. And certainly you want to treat your employees well. Okay? Similarly, you want good employees that are going to treat you well. Okay? So, with that sort of information, what should you do as an employer? Well, first thing you got to think about is what are you going to pay them? Well, clearly you want to pay them zero, work them to death, and make all sorts of money. Unfortunately, you can't do that. Slavery was abolished many years ago, thank God. Now, Fair Labor Standards Act came out about 1938, and again, for those of y'all that are studied a lot of business, you'll notice a lot of interesting things happened in the 1930s as a result of the Great Depression and whatnot. Minimum hourly wage. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, golly gee, I wish they would raise the minimum wage. Well, let me hold you right there. If they raise the minimum wage, the employer is going to say, well, I don't have enough money to pay all these employees, so I'm going to fire some employees and make these employees that I still have work a little harder, and hopefully the productivity will balance out. Again, if you think about it from a business perspective, that's what your business owners are going to say. But in 2007, there was an amendment made that minimum wage would go up to $5.85 an hour. Folks, I remember when minimum wage was like below $5 an hour. I used to make that when I was a young man. And it goes up to $7.25 in 2009. And again, there are good and there's bad to it. I would argue, as a potential business owner, that as minimum wage goes up, I do more work myself. Maximum number of hours before overtime owed, 40 hours, and obviously after 40 hours it's time and a half. Certainly you can get time off, but this can all be superseded by contract. And folks, let me tell you, there are several jobs out there where I probably don't even make minimum wage. After all my expenses are paid, I probably lose money on several deals, but it is what it is. And folks, for those of y'all that are business owners, one day you may have to deal with that as well. But hopefully all of you will be making several $100s an hour and will be very happy. Employment requirements for minors. Certainly, when I was 12 years old, I was cutting grass. I had a lawnmower. I put gas and oil in it. I went to my next door neighbor, cut the grass, cut his grass on the other side, and so on and so forth. When I got a little older, I worked for a grounds crew, cut a lot more grass. And when I get older than that, I started waiting tables. Okay, so I've always worked, even since I was a very, arguably a young boy. But there are requirements for minors, and certainly I should not have been working when I was 12, but I did it. I've always been an entrepreneur. Break time for nursing mothers, and that was new in 2010. And certainly this is important. We need to take care of mothers, and if they're nursing children, or they need maternity leave, and in some cases, men even need paternity leave. And these are all good things. The WARN Act, worker adjustment and retaining notification. And employers must give notice of plant closing and mass layoffs. Okay, why? Because it's fair. Okay, you got to give notice in writing 60 days prior, when possible, to employees or the union, and this applies to 100 plus more of more than one half-time employees. So this is an act set out to warn employees of they're going to be losing their job. so they can have adequate time to find another position. And I realize it's hard these days. However, even if I wasn't practicing law, if I had to, I'd go back to cutting grass. So keep in mind you can always do that. Family medical leave, available for men or women who birth and care of a newborn child of employee, adoption or foster care placement, care of immediate family member with serious health conditions, child, spouse, or parent. These are all things where the feds have stepped in and said, hey, medical leave is necessary. Employee serious health condition, family members with qualifying exigency arising out of being called to active duty in the military. Again, these are important things. I don't know if y'all know, I do a little bit of property management on the side. I've had military who have been called to go and serve. I shook their hand. I said, thank you for your service, and don't you worry about anything else. I'll take care of it. Why? Well, one, it's the law, but two, it's our military, and we always respect our military. Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, again, for our servicemen and women. Protects those who holding civilian jobs who voluntarily or involuntarily leave to serve the military or the national disaster medical system. Employee must notify employer of call to service. Again, this is a good thing. Period of service must not exceed 5 years. Release from service must be honorable. Okay. Individual must report back to employer within a reasonable time. So what is it saying? Well, if you're dishonorably discharged, you can't go back to your job. Okay. Now, this is what's interesting about it. Returning employee must be restored to same or equivalent job with full benefits which would have accrued had they not left. Again, it's important that we take care of these individuals. They stand up, they want to protect this country, we keep them in work. Okay? Occupational Safety and Health Administration, concerned with hazardous conditions in the workplace. Employer duty to have workplace freed from recognized hazards, right to inspection, and no retaliation. Again, why? Because we want our employees to be safe. And who is it easier to protect the place? The employer or the employee? No, it's the employer. Pension plans, Employment Retirement Income Security Act, Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. HIPAA is one of those that I actually deal with almost on a daily basis. People are asking for medical records and whatnot, and whenever I get those, I always need to get a HIPAA form. And that HIPAA form allows the individual asking for the medical records to get it, and they have to have the consent of the patient. Employment at will. Employees are either contractual employees or at-will employees. Historically, at-will employees could be terminated for any reason, good, bad, or even immoral, unless they were protected by some sort of exception. Like I said, where I work, I am at will. If my boss one day were to look at me and say, golly gee, Childs, you have on a blue shirt. I don't like blue shirts. I like red and black shirts. You're gone. I could be fired. Exceptions, implied promise of good faith. Wrongful termination includes discharge for performance of public obligation, discharge for whistleblowing, and discharge for exercising legal rights. These would be exceptions to that rule. Discharge for refusing to commit a crime. Okay? All of these things would be an exception to the At-Will Act. Workers' privacy, personnel files, employee access, restrict third-party access. And this is important. There are times around tax time where I might need information from my employer. Chattanooga State, for example, I might need pay stubs, to file with taxes or to file for scholarships or whatever I need it for. I have a right to that. Private employers restricted from using lie detector for applicant screenings. How about that? Some states limit drug testing. Drug testing is always one of those that I've just laughed at. Oh, you want me to take a drug test? Well, okay. Where do you want me to take it? What do you want here? Take my blood. Go ahead. Workers' Compensation Act protects employees' families from job-related risks. An employer acted unreasonably. Test for compensation. Injury was accidental. Scope of employment. exclusive remedy rule. Now, workers' comp cases are pretty interesting cases. The firm I'm with has actually been toying with the idea of really getting into workers' compensation, and it's an area I don't know everything about, but I do know enough that it's a lot of form work. It's a lot of gathering information, putting the package together, and trying to get workers' comp to pay for various injuries. Employment eligibility verification required under the Immigration Reform and Control Act. Employers must complete and retain the I-9 employment eligibility verification form. And a lot of you have probably already filled this out. Even if you go and work for a restaurant, you have to give information. And believe it or not, when I do this, I take my passport, my ID, my bar card, my social service, or selective service form, all this stuff. I take the whole list of them, and I sort of like pick a card, any card. What do you want? Employer protection from employee lawsuits. Certainly, we want to keep the employer protected. So what do? They have job descriptions. That's what you're supposed to do. Manuals and files. Written warnings. All right, signed and noted. Whenever you sign on with a new business, you fill out a lot of paperwork. Letters of explanation. All these are done in an effort to protect the employer from the employee. But again, it's one of those things where, whenever I work, I want to do the best job I possibly can, and likewise, if I have someone working for me, I want them to have that same attitude. So it's very important whenever you are hiring individuals that you hire the best people you possibly can, and try to avoid this stuff, but make sure you do the proper steps that you're required to do by law.